This is Jerry Beck, animation historian.
Hi, I'm Trustin Howard, and I was Filbert.
I'm Leonardi, Arthur Leonardi, the animator on Filbert.
And Filbert is one of the most unusual items in the whole Warner Brothers animation collection. By the way, this animation here of Filbert dancing was done by Art Babbitt, who was brought in special just for this opening scene. This short was originally a TV pilot. In fact, this is the theatrical version. The pilot never aired. The show never went on the air. But Warner Brothers decided to release it as a short subject to theaters, which they did. And that's the version we're watching here that had the Warner Brothers opening title at the front. And what you're missing here is Filbert's theme song, which is on the TV show version of this. What you'll also not see are commercial breaks and a laugh track, which was originally on the TV pilot version. It stars William Shallert, who's really well known for being the dad on the Patty Duke Show. He's also in a million TV shows throughout the years. He was on the Dobie Gillis show right before this, and when this didn't make it to air, he went to the Patty Duke show. Friz Freeling, of course, handled the animation, and here are the credits with the name Art Leonardi as one of the animators listed there. Friz Freeling is the director, and Richard Donner directed the live action. This is one of the very first productions of Richard Donner, who went on to great fame in later years, the director of The Omen, the Superman movies, Lethal Weapon, so many films.
He just seemed to be, a very nice guy, very loose. He let us all really do our own thing. And I guess it was shortly after that he really began moving up, as you say, in very heavyweight movies. But he seemed to be a really nice dynamite guy who knew his craft. And I was glad to see that, out of Filbert, he began to move into some really wonderful, wonderful movies.
This is really interesting. Now, Art, it looks like they used the real model sheets.
They did, yeah. Right.
On that shot on the board there. And this show is really an update. It's almost an update of the Out of the Inkwell kind of Max Fleischer thing, a cartoonist and his kind of mischievous animation creation. It also fits in with the kind of gimmick comedies that were being made for TV at that time, like Mr. Ed, My Favorite Martian, I Dream of Jeannie, that kind of thing. I love how in this film they try to come up with an explanation for why does Filbert exist. At one point, Shallert says to Filbert, "I accept you as retribution for my past transgressions." That's their explanation for why he can talk to a cartoon character.
Let me be the cartoonist, Filbert. I'll finish this later. Angela's coming over to cook dinner tonight.
Angela? Griff, I think it's time you and I had a man-to-man talk. Right me.
There's another reason you don't see Filbert anymore. It's in black and white. He smokes a cigarette. Things like that, which keep this from ever being shown. But that's the beauty of DVD, that we can dig this out. Art, tell us about this production. What do you remember from when this was made? This was done at the tail end of the studio of the Warner Brothers.
It was. One thing I like to think about is Johnny Burton Jr. was our cameraman. He held all the, shot all the material for all the cartoons, and he told me about this production, and he said he was happy it didn't go because of all the hard work he had to do to put it across. And if it went on every week, probably kill him. All the material in here where the character is on the tabletop, everything had to be rotoscoped. Every element on the table had to be drawn under camera on a piece of paper, animation paper. That was then given to the animator, so he'd know exactly where to animate the little Filbert. Without that, you'd be stepping on books and things like that. So Johnny's job was to go through every scene wherever Filbert was working with live action. He had to make sure the animator got a crisp, rotoscoped drawing. Rotoscope means projecting the frame down onto his tabletop under the camera, projected onto a piece of paper, and then laboriously draw every element in there. Then that would be given to the animator on pegs to keep it in the right position, and then the animator would animate the character.
I noticed that they really try to avoid those sort of shots as best they can. They have a lot of it where it's photographed against a still photo of the background. usually, but there are a lot of shots of him combined with live action. Freeling, of course, was familiar with doing this from back in 1940, You Ought to Be in Pictures, the short subject that he did where he combined Daffy Duck with Leon Schlesinger. He also did the animation sequences in a couple of Doris Day films, My Dream Is Yours, where he has Bugs Bunny dancing with Doris Day. And of course, they've been doing commercials in this later period too, where they probably combined live action animation. But to do it on a weekly basis for a network TV show would have been
Wow, look
quite
at that
a
oven, a
chore.
double oven.
ABC was the network that was going to put this on. There was some kind of a situation with an executive leaving the company, ABC at that time, and all the Warner Brothers shows that were in development basically didn't happen, and this was one of the casualties of that.
Is this the bonus?
Back here, Billy.
If you notice where he splashes into the water, all of that material had to be controlled by the cameraman. He had to take an object, splash it into the water, then backtrack and rotoscope the splash so that the character would look like he fell into the water. Where he's floating on the water, Johnny would have to go in there and rotoscope every element so it would be believable. So that's why he said he was happy that it didn't go.
Well, when you finish shaving, will you bring back the suntan oil? You got a tiptoe. Two lips. Hard to believe I was once a
Freeling had said in an interview that he had to work with the writer for this sitcom because the writer didn't know animation, so he had to work with the writer. He had to be on the stage with the director, and he also had to supervise the animators and do layouts. So he also felt that this really would have been a backbreaking proposition.
Well, as you notice, all the scenes where he's running through a scene, everything had to be storyboarded. Everything had to be put down on it as a little comic book strip so that the cameraman, the live action cameraman, would follow the storyboard so that we could lock in the animation. Like going into the bear's mouth, you had to register the mouth of the bear so that the animation would be believable going into the mouth. And like that, an object under the rug would be mechanically made. Going up the curtain, they would pull the curtain and have some material working behind it.
Trustin Howard, you were picked for the voice for this project. Tell us memories. What was this about?
I'm not aware of all the technical things that went into it. I can kind of tell you all of the things that led up to the show. I know that Frizz Freeling and David DePatie, the guys that were, really behind this thing. And David kept telling me that we've tried 1,000 actors. I guess he was trying to build my confidence. Maybe there might have been 5. But I think because of my nightclub background, I was a nightclub performer, played all the clubs across the country. And for some reason, it just seemed that this little street smart Filbert kind of fit in with my particular type of humor. In fact, many of the little one-liners, I didn't know I was a writer, but I wrote many of the things like the dog chasing him, every day it's a mile and an eighth, and, things like that. So basically, they went through an awful lot before the show, and then when we were looking for an actor, I must have read with about 20 people, 20, different leading men type of guys, but they seemed to be very, very sold on William Schallert. They really seemed to like him a lot, and the show had everything really to make it, and I must say that it was really devastating when it didn't hit because we were already scheduled for Sunday night at 8 o'clock, and we were ready to go, and then when it fell apart, it was just awful. In fact, it made me really think about changing careers, which I did. I really thought this could make it. It had Joanna Barnes, who came off of the Broadway stage, did a great, great part in, I believe it was Aunt Mame with Rosalind Russell, and she played a non-personality, really great, great type of person, very, very sharp. And Schallert was dynamite. Dick Donner went on, as you said, to do so many great movies. So basically, we had everything going for us. And when that fell apart, I know Frizz was just destroyed. David DePatie could not believe it. And, you know, at that time, I mean, we're looking at it now many years later. At that time, it was an extremely hot show. It was, you know, it had all the elements to make it. So basically, as I say, after that happened, I just really couldn't figure coming from the nightclub world, although I did a few movies and things like that. But I thought if one person steps out of line or leaves or something and you can take a show like this and not go forward. So then I began to think that maybe I better start heading in another direction. So basically I began to think about writing, and it might have been a good thing because I ended up writing the revival of This Is Your Life. I ended up doing Andy Griffith and so many others, Betty Davis and all that. And I had hoped to do this show. I really was so sold on it. And it just, you know, pushed me in another direction. And Frizz called me many, many times. He wanted to somehow or other keep going with this type of live animation thing. He, a few years later, had an idea to use the same street smart guy like Filbert, and he wanted to call him Moxie. And I don't know if you guys are aware of that, but he really wanted to do this thing. He asked if I could, you know, maybe write some things for it, although I was really into it, you know, another career. But he called me, and every time Frizz called me, I did come in, and I gave him an idea. I said, well, we can call him, you know, say that he's Maximilius, maximum, minimum, and we'll call him Moxie. And he liked that. He wanted to go with that, but for some reason, they just could not do it. And that was it, you know, and it just was really devastating because we really thought we had something here. And I'm glad to see that it's, you know, after all these years, it's coming back out on DVD. Although it did play the theaters, I remember that, and that was a little helpful. But it was just too bad that it didn't go. And oddly enough, the live animation, I think, went later with a thing called My World and Welcome to It. So that's some of the things that I remember about it. But it was quite an experience, and I'm just sorry that, you know, it didn't happen then. But it's kind of nice that it has a second life.
I better warn Blip about this, kid. Uh-oh, here comes that mutt again.
Hey, Michael.
Lay off,
Hey.
Powderhead.
Art, when you entered the business, all cartoons were in color. It's very rare that you did anything in black and white. Was there any difference in working with this? Frizz obviously had worked in black and white back in the 30s.
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, there's no difference. The animator's point of view is we were working with pencil and paper, so we didn't get interested in what the colors would be. We would animate the storyboard, the sequence, and it would go on to the ink and paint department, which was hundreds of girls would paint these cells. And that was very interesting. And now it's gone to the wayside. Computers have taken over all the girls' jobs. But every cell, every drawing that you see in the cartoon would have had to be hand painted, which was a time-consuming element. The girl would have to go through. She had at her desk a rack of maybe 20 or 30 shells with screening so that the air could get through. They would have to paint, say, a character with just his eyes with white paint, then put on the shelf, then go proceed all the white eyes, then come back. By the time they got back to the first 30th drawing, the whites of the eyes would dry. They would then paint the flesh color over it, and that was on and on. So if there was 6 or 7, 8 cartoon colors on a cell, they had to proceed and do this one at a time. Nowadays, they use a computer, so they just push a button and the color is in there. The only drawback to this is there is no physical cell in your hands anymore. It's all in the computer. It's just a digital picture. That's why cells are so much in demand nowadays, because they were all hand created and there's just so many out there, and that's it. I was just wondering at the time when I saw this again, being in black and white, at the time the other shows that were an animated show that was coming out in the evening, they were trying to compete with that. Why they didn't do this in color? Because that may have had a stronger impact as a pilot. To me, it was.
It might have. I mean, this was color TV certainly existed at this
Oh,
point,
yes,
and
sure.
but still, this was like early '60s. Color TV really exploded a few years later. Even though, you know, obviously Disney's Wonderful World of Color and things probably would have been very expensive. This was a pilot. It wasn't a 100% go. Maybe it was. I don't know. But was it a sure thing before they filmed it that
Well,
they were going to put it on?
The element was that Warner's noticed that Hanna-Barbera made the Flintstones, and it was a very successful evening show. And so they said, let's do something that'll compete. And then to come out with a pilot in black and white, I think, kind of put a hole in the boat.
Maybe, but black and white was the standard. I mean, the Dick Van Dyke Show, the Beverly Hillbillies #1 show.
Yeah,
at
that's
this
true.
time, they were all in black and white at that time. I don't know if that was, a big hole, but certainly
Well,
it might have been more impressive when they put it to theaters. It certainly would have made it a better product. Again, they weren't thinking like that, I don't think, at that time. Do you by any chance know, they've been holding up a Filbert comic book and he's been drawing at the board. That was artwork that had to be done before they filmed.
Yeah, that was
Do you know-
props. That was props that we do.
Do
in the
you know who
studio.
might have drawn that?
I may have done something. Holly Pratt was the top designer at the field. Chris Freeling would be giving some notes on what he would expect to see as a character, but Holly Pratt was his final designer. So that smacks of Holly Pratt's designs.
Where do you remember this fitting in this was released really when the studio was closing, but do you remember this being done during the same time as the Bugs Bunny show or after that, or?
Bugs Bunny was going right to the end, so they would just overlap. We never had just one cartoon going through there. We may have 3 or 4 cartoons going all at one time.
I mean, this was the end of the studio. People think things fizzle out, but if you really think about it, the last years of that studio, they had the Bugs Bunny show, they had theatrical shorts, they had this pilot.
Right.
They probably had some commercials too. I mean, it was quite a area of activity.
Well, we did the other one also at the time, Limpet,
All right.
which was a combination. That was in color with Don Knotts turning into a fish. I worked on that, and that was a very successful movie. And so that was going on during the period of closing up the place. So this was at the same time. This may have come before the one about Don Knotts as the fish.
Trustin, so
Yes.
tell us, I want to hear more about before and after with your career. You started out as a stand-up comic?
Yeah, I was a stand-up comic. I started at about 17.
What was your stage name?
I had Trustin and also Slick, as you know. I used that too. I didn't figure that basically Slick could end up being a network performer or Slick could be a writer, so that was dropped. And the last time I used it was on the 3D show that you saw. And that was it. But I worked nightclubs all across the country. And then basically when I came out to Hollywood, I was called in on this. I had just gotten a new agent, and this was the first thing that they called me in on. And I understood that there were so many people trying for it and everything else, but it just seemed that Frizz and David DePatie, they just kind of liked the style I was using. I think they liked the nightclub style that I had that we used on Filbert. And the little one-liners, which, basically I could do because I had done them, most of my nightclub career. But anyway, we really went around and around and around. I mean, we tried for a long time before they settled in on me, and a long time before they settled in on William Shallard. And finally, when we came up to it, I think it had been months. In fact, many times I said, I'm finished. I'm not going to do this anymore, because they kept calling me back and forth, but I guess that's par for the course on a show like this or a sitcom or whatever. But I did go back, and finally we settled on Shallard, and they settled on me, and then they brought in Joanna Barnes, and of course Dick Donner. I mean, goodness gracious, he was a wonderful director and proved it later.
So let me understand this. So the failure of this pilot to get on the air, you decided to change your career and go into writing?
Absolutely. It really made me wonder, if you can have something at that time that was that good and really scheduled to go, and if one person or whomever can just pull it out of the schedule, and a show that we all felt was, dynamite. The talent was certainly there, directing, acting. So at that point I began to think, well, maybe I better start to think about something else. So I did, of course, once again, I was in competition now with writers. So basically the first thing I got into was, again, in competition. I went after a show called The Joey Bishop Show, because they were just going on ABC opposite Johnny Carson. And I had never really written before. I did my act and also, as I say, some one-liners for Filbert. but I had to send in material, and oddly enough, just out of nowhere, I didn't have any credits as a writer or anything, just a desire. And I became the head writer of that show for the 3 years that we were on. And then, moved into other game shows and movies. I produced some things. I did a series of 39 shows on the paranormal called The Unknown, you may remember, posted by Regis Philbin. In fact, I just finished a book that's out right now called My Life with Regis and Joey, and it seems to be doing pretty well, so I'm very happy with that. So everything is a chain reaction, and sometimes, a terrible blow can lead to something that might be a little bit better. But I've always been very fond of this little character. I kept that script on my desk for years, hoping that it would, make a comeback, because I really did like it. And so it's just so odd that here at this part of my career, certain things are coming back, like my stand-up on that 3D show, which...
Yeah, just to explain to our audience that you made a 3D short back in the 50s, 53 or 4.
I forget when it was, but I had forgotten about that completely. And all of a sudden, I had a lot of people calling me and saying, "Were you the guy in the 3D short?" And I suddenly got all kinds of calls.
It was shown at a recent 3D festival in Hollywood, and it's now going to come out on DVD.
Yeah, it was at the Egyptian Theater, and that was it. So that was really, nice to see that too. But it's really odd. That came back, and Filbert came back, and, maybe I'm in a little twilight zone.
The unknown. Just to follow up 2 things. One is, when you say work on game shows, did you write questions? I mean, or you just write the format of the show? Or what game show in particular did you work on?
I did a thing called, if you remember, the Almost Anything Goes shows, where I think it was Bob Banner had the first game show where people would do games opposite each other, where the street people would work. And so they did Almost Anything Goes, and then I did a thing called Junior Almost Anything Goes, and it was always kind of on ABC. And so we did that. I did a revival. There was a big Broadway hit called Top Banana. I don't know if you remember the name Phil Silvers and things like that. So basically, I became very good friends with Johnny Mercer family. Johnny Mercer, Moon River, and the Days of Wine and Roses, and all those things. And they were not able to sell the show. It just laid it there in a drawer. His son and I became partners in a record company. And he suddenly said, we have a thing called Top Banana. I don't know, it came out of the drawer, and it was a big hit like 50 years ago. And I just thought that maybe, we could bring it to life. So having some of my nightclub background, I put it together, I revised the show, sold it to Las Vegas, and we played there for quite some time. And then HBO came in, and I did it as a movie version for HBO. It was a 2-hour show with, of course, Phil Silvers was long gone, but we got a lot of the comic characters, and a guy by the name of Jack Carter, we got him to play the Top Banana, but that was enjoyable.
So in the subsequent years from Filbert, you said Frizz would call you occasionally. Did you ever do any more voices for cartoons or anything?
Not really. He always wanted me to come in and try some things, but I just was really on another level. But whenever he called, I came in, and he had some ideas. He wondered if I could add some things. That's why he was so really interested in doing this thing, Moxie. He had called me about that constantly. And I wrote up some things for him, but, he had, I guess, Bugs Bunny and different things going for him. But every now and then he probably got an idea and said, I got to call Trustin and see if we can do this again. Because he loved this little character. It was really deep into his mind. And any way that I could help him with writing or even a little voice to prod him on, I would come in and do it. He was really a genius. I really was fond of Frizz.
Art, any final thoughts or anything on
Well, I was so interested in listening to him, I just went into my own twilight zone. Like you say, Frizz was one of a kind, and he was very creative, and he knew his craft very well, so I can see why you keep asking him to come back.
Trustin, did you ever get a souvenir cell of Filbert for your collection?
No, the only thing that I got was the script. That was it. I would have loved, some of those things to remind me of the show, but I'll watch it from here on in on DVD, so we'll be okay.
Well, if he twists my arm, maybe I can get him a nice
Oh, really?
model sheet and maybe a color version of the Filbert.
Oh, I really would
Yeah,
love
I'll
that.
do that for you.
He worked there, so he saved it.
I saved it, but I'll make one special for you in color.
Well, that's really sweet. I really appreciate it, Art.
So I'm on record doing
Yes,
this, so
I
I
know.
can't get out
It's
of
going to
it.
be on the DVD too.
Right,
It's going to be
right.
so billions of people will
Right.
know that you said that.
Well, I'll finish it
Well,
and I'll give it to him, and then I can let them have a copy. They can maybe put it in to show them what Filbert should look like in color.
there you go. I want to thank both of you for being with us on this audio track commentary. It's a great film, and it's great to learn about both of you.
It really was kind of thrilling for me to, see Filbert again after all these years, and I really enjoyed this little round table. It's kind of nice, brought back a wonderful memory.
I enjoyed the session myself. Of course, I like to talk and talk and talk and talk and continue, but people are waving me off right now. So I just want to say it was a pleasure to be in here with both of you and completing this little session.
The end.
Could you take out 3 sticks of butter and just put them on the island? Thank you.
We're done.
Oh, okay. I have to go potty.
Okay.